There are very confronting pictures out of Ukraine where a maternity hospital has been bombed in a town surrounded by Russian troops. There's no official death toll yet, but the attack sent newborns and women in labour out into ruins and snow. Tonight, teams are still searching through the destruction looking for survivors.
This is the standard sound of Mariupol, a town now surrounded. But the victims are not soldiers. Mums, babies, from a maternity and children's hospital. Inside, soldiers check wards for survivors, as women are carried out into the rubble and snow, next to a giant crater in what should be a civilian safe haven.
I cannot realize why it's necessary for Russian troops to destroy hospital.
Tonight, children are feared buried in that rubble as victims are laid to rest in mass graves, a tragedy of war most thought were consigned to the past. In the major trauma hospital in the capital, Kyiv, the chief doctor tells us he and his staff were coping until this. Taking to YouTube after operating on a 10-year-old victim. My daughter's 10 years old, he says. Someone has to stop this. My biggest fear is a missile flying into our hospital. And how do the Russians feel about unleashing that kind of hell? We were about to find out. The Ukraine government today organising a media conference with 7 Russian prisoners of war who dutifully delivered a message direct to their president, Vladimir Putin. Stop the air bombing, stop sending the troops, stop killing civilians, he said. For local media, emotions boiled over. How can you kill women and children, she asks. Such little children, he adds. It took minutes to find a reply.
In this situation, our nation is fascist.
Propaganda forced into it. They said they were happy volunteers.
Chris Reason from Channel 7 Australia.
They even took questions.
Can I ask any of you as well, what will be the consequences of you speaking to the world's media like this?
We don't know, he says. We don't know at all. I'd thought if I was going to meet a Russian on this assignment, they'd be armed and dangerous. The only fight here was to hold back the tears.
The sight of Russian prisoners of war being paraded for the media is becoming a regular tactic for Ukrainian authorities. The target audience isn't the local audience or the world media, us, it's Russia.
Fears too now for Chernobyl. Power to the plant has been cut off while the UN has lost connection to a second nuclear facility. That, as the Pentagon confirms, it's cancelled all plans to send jets to assist.
The transfer of MiG-29s to Ukraine may be mistaken as escalatory and could result in a significant Russian reaction that might increase the prospects of a military escalation with NATO.
The Ukrainian president increasingly frustrated. He wants those planes and a no-fly zone now.
Yesterday, the world did nothing. I'm sorry, but it's true. If you are united against the Nazism and this terror, you have to close.
A leader at breaking point in a war that's hit a new low.
And once again, Chris Reason is live for us in Kyiv. Chris, there are now fears Russia is planning to use biological weapons.
Yeah, good evening to you, Mark. That's right. Russian officials have publicly announced that they claim that the Ukrainians are making chemical weapons themselves. Now, US intelligence and the White House hit straight back at that, saying the claim is false, preposterous, and more than likely a ruse, an excuse for Russia to go down that path themselves and potentially use biological or chemical weapons here in Ukraine. They fear that after having bombed a maternity hospital, there is no new low that Russia won't sink to in order to win this war. Mark?
Chris Reason in the Ukrainian capital. Thank you.
Returning to our top story now, day 14 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the British PM calling the latest attacks depraved. Jeff Parry joins us now live from Lviv. Jeff, we've seen some terrible pictures from the war in Ukraine, but the scenes of an attack on a children's and maternity hospital are simply shocking.
They are, and the war entering its third week, and what we're seeing now is, as you described a little bit earlier, a new low. The Russians say that they do not fire at civilian targets, but it's pretty hard to explain this away. A massive bomb dropped in the forecourt of a maternity and children's hospital in Mariupol. The damage there for everyone to see, the whole complex destroyed inside, just twisted medical equipment. Most of the people were probably in the basement at the time because they take shelter during the day. 17 people we understand to be the initial injury toll, including pregnant women about to go into labour. Distressing scenes as we see them covered in blood being stretchered out of the ruins there. But there is a belief that there are children and expectant mothers and staff trapped under the rubble there, and rescuers are desperately trying to save them. Of course, this is in the city of Mariupol, which has put up with so much in the last 2 weeks, and now they have to contend with this. The President Zelensky described this moment as an atrocity, and he said, "How much longer will the world be an accomplice to ignoring terror?"
And the president also continues his call, Jeff, for a no-fly zone over Ukraine, warning millions of lives could be lost.
Yes, indeed, and this is a constant refrain from the Ukrainian president. He says, if you can secure the skies for us, and he's talking to NATO, then we can take care of what's happening on the land. He's been constantly rebuffed, though. NATO worried that for them to put jets to secure the air above Ukraine would put them in direct conflict with Russian aircraft, and therefore lead to the start of World War III. Some people say, of course, that World War III has already begun, but President Zelensky still keen for a no-fly zone, although the provision of the Polish jets, that's also stalled. Anne?
Can you update us, Jeff, on the situation in Chernobyl, where electricity has been cut to some parts of the reactor?
Yes, this is a growing concern. Of course, this is the nuclear power station where part of it blew up in 1986. It's still an operating nuclear power plant. They require electricity from outside the plant to keep the fuel rods stable. They do that by covering it with water. If they can't get electricity, the fear is that the water will drain away, and that's a very dangerous situation. The fear is that that could lead to possible radiation leaks in the future. Anne?
Jeff, you're based there in Lviv in western Ukraine. There have been no direct attacks in that region, but locals must nevertheless be terrified as millions of people flee across the border.
Yes, well, it's become a hub for all those people who are coming from the east, from the conflict in places like Kharkiv and Kiev and Mariupol, if they can get out. Hundreds of thousands of people have flocked to this city, preparatory to leaving for neighbouring countries like Poland and Romania and Hungary. But they're also preparing for war here. They're making Molotov cocktails. We're seeing civilians lining up to join the army to get a little bit of training. There is a fear, of course, that Russia will turn its eyes west once it's dealt with places like the east of the country and the central part of the country, because Lviv is considered the possible alternative capital if the east falls to the Russians, and that what's left of Ukraine could set up government here in Lviv. Anne?
All right, Jeff, thank you so much for updating us. Jeff Parry joining us live from Lviv in western Ukraine. Thanks a lot, Jeff.